seated with me. Well, that was an interesting song we sang at the end of the reading of the Passion. Were you there when they crucified my Lord? And one of the things I want to do today is to say, yes, we were there. And I'd like us today symbolically to go through the Passion narrative and see go into the Garden of Gethsemane, go into Caiaphas' palace, go into Pilate's palace, go right up to Calvary, and see were we there. See where you were when that was happening. Today we have on this Sunday, we read the whole Passion in the Gospel according to St. Mark. One of the scripture scholars, I guess of the last century, 20th century, said that every gospel is a passion narrative with a long introduction. So if you look at all gospels, they all end with this same narrative taught according to different evangelists. So we're here today, and we're looking at the first, actually. Mark is the oldest gospel, written sometime around 60 A.D. or so. So 28 years or so after Jesus' death and resurrection. So it's the first words that come, and it's the gospel, really, if you understand where Mark wrote this gospel. He wrote it for the people in Rome, and he wrote down St. Peter's teaching, what St. Peter was teaching to the church in Rome about this crucifixion. So, you have your little handouts there. I prefer to use my Bible because I prefer it. So, I'm going to be looking at our scriptures, and we're going to look at it, and what I want us to do is to identify ourselves in the scene, in that particular scene, and see where we are and what we did in that scene. Are we okay with that? Let's try that. It's a different picture of how to do the Passion, but I think if we can see ourselves and see our own human condition, our own sinfulness, and see that in these different elements in the Passion, I think we'll come to a better understanding of who this Jesus is what we're going to end with, okay? So, we're in the Garden of Gethsemane. Let's go there first. That's where our Passion started. Jesus goes up to the Mount of Olives after he leaves Jerusalem, and he goes to the Garden of Gethsemane. Gethsemane means crushed olives. So it's where the olive trees were. They're still there. Some of the olive trees that were there when Jesus was sweating blood in that garden. And so he takes Peter and James and John away from the other apostles, the other disciples, and he takes them with him closer, and then he says, stay here while I go over there to pray. And then he goes and prays 3 times. And the 3 times he prays, let me just guarantee as a side note here, if you want to know how to pray and always have your prayer answered, always end with the words that Jesus ended with in the garden. So he goes away, and he prays, Abba, Father, everything is possible for you. Take this cup from me. Now, here's the part. If you end your prayers with this, guaranteed God will answer it. Absolutely, 100%. Yet not my will, but your will be done. So we can pray for anything we want. Jesus prays. In the Bible, there are 2 cups talked about. One is the cup of God's blessings. One is the cup of God's wrath. And so Jesus, on the night before he died, was there, and he wanted the cup of God's wrath, the cup of the curses that come with the rejection by men, abandonment, and all the suffering and excruciating pain he was going to feel when they nailed him to the cross. And he asked, Father, is there another way? Can I do this in a way that's more gentle and less demanding of me? He wanted the cup of wrath to be removed. But he ended his prayer 3 times. Not my will, Father, but your will be done. And we know from Isaiah's lesson, which we read at the beginning here, that in that beautiful prophetic word, 700 years before the event, actually, Isaiah predicted that Jesus would be crucified and that he would be beaten so badly that if you heard those words, they always give me chicken skin. He looked so bad, they couldn't even identify him as a human being, Isaiah says. They had beat him so mercilessly the night before they crucified him. Can you imagine? Can you imagine that? And so, here we are. Jesus prays this prayer, and he goes back to Peter, James, and John. Now, these were his best buddies. These were his disciples, his closest 3. James and John, brothers of sons of Zebedee, and Peter, who was, in all accounts, the leader of the apostles, those 12. And how does he find them? Sleeping. Now, when you read about sleep in the Bible, it's not a good thing. Because sleep in the Bible, now if you fall asleep now, we'll pin it on you. But sleep in the Bible symbolically means a spiritual indifference to reality. So here's Jesus on the night before he's dying. He goes off to pray. He doesn't want to die. He doesn't want to do this. But he submits himself totally to his Father's will. And he comes back and he finds them sleeping. Now the question we have to ask ourselves, does Jesus find us in that spirit of indifference at times, where we simply don't care? You know, sometimes I think we all come to church, we hear these Gospels every 3 years, and it goes in one ear and out the other. That's sleeping. That's sleeping through the good news of what God has done for us. And so that sleeping that we do is our spiritual indifference. We're saying to God, these apostles were saying to God, Jesus, we don't care what happens to you, essentially. It's not going to take any time out of my life. It's not going to take any emotion from me. It's not going to hurt me at all, so I don't care. And so, let us ask ourselves on this Palm Sunday as we approach this great Holy Week, the great week. Are we spiritually indifferent to things that God has done for us? God's always working miracles around us. He's doing things all around us. But do we not even see that? Are we indifferent to what he's doing in our lives? So, next scene. Oh, before we leave the garden, there's that one passage that's only in Mark. It says in verse 31, I think you have verses in there, don't you? 51, I'm sorry. It says, a young man wearing nothing but a linen garment was following Jesus. Now, we don't know who that young man remains unnamed, but most Bible scholars say it was probably Mark, a little intersection of himself into the gospel narrative. He was following Jesus. When they seized him, he fled naked, leaving his garment behind. Now, like the word in the Bible for sleeping, it's not a good word. The word here for garment in the Bible is the same word that's used for baptismal robe. You know, when people were baptized, they took off, they took off their clothes and put on a white robe. And they went down into the pool and were baptized in the water and came out and wore that robe for a whole week. And so, what is the symbolic meaning here? What is this text teaching us here? This man, Mark, if you will, left his baptismal identity behind him. Now, when have we ever done that? Sinners. lots of times. You and I, we often forget that we're just not the son of Mary and Adam, Lipka. We're not the son of anybody. We are the sons and daughters of God. We are His children. And how many times when we get into a place where being His children becomes kind of dicey for us, becomes kind of iffy, could end up with some problems, where we simply hide that and just we go along to get along. You see so much of that in the church today, huh? People going along with all the fads, all the stuff going on in our culture, and simply saying, I'm not His son. I'm not His daughter. Don't bother me with that. That's a political issue. Well, killing babies in the womb is not a political issue. It's a life issue. And yet, how many of us just simply walk by sometimes abortion clinics and say nothing, pray nothing? We can't even pray outside now, and just don't risk anything. So disheartening. So this young Mark ran away and left his identity behind. And as we approach this Holy Week, how often do we leave our baptismal identity? The fact that you and I are sons and daughters of God the Father. And Jesus is our eldest brother, who gave His life on the tree of the cross because He loved us so much. Okay. Now, Jesus goes, they arrest Him. He's taken to the Sanhedrin. He's taken, first of all, to Caiaphas' house. He's the high priest that year, and we learn a lot of other things there. But he goes there, and then the high priest asked him a question. They put up a bunch of witnesses and testimonies, and it's like I don't want to say this. It's like people who make that thing. They swear, "So help me, me," because they don't pray on the Bible anymore. So help me, which means nothing. So anyway, so the high priest, if you look at, he says, the high priest says in verse 61 in our reading, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" And what does Jesus answer? He answers in the words of the prophet Daniel in chapter 7, where Daniel sees the Ancient of Days sitting on his throne. And the Son of Man comes to him, and God the Father gives to the Son of Man, that Son of Man in Daniel, all of His divine authority, all of His divine power. And so that's how Jesus answers. He says, "I am, and you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One, the Ancient of Days, and coming on the clouds of heaven." So Jesus says there that He is not a prophet, He is not the Messiah that they were expecting, a warrior king like David. He is not a human being. He is a divine and human being. He's a God and man, all in one. And so He's saying, yes, I am the Messiah, but it's not the Messiah you were looking for. I'm the suffering Messiah. And so the high priest couldn't take that. He couldn't say, so what he did, he tore his clothes, which was a symbol of anger and disgust. And he tore all his garments. And he said, what? We don't need any more witnesses. This man is guilty of blasphemy, and blasphemy is punishable by death. Now, the interesting thing here, I never thought of it, but the way the Jews killed people was they stoned them to death. But you see, then we would be guilty of blaming the Jews for his death if they did that. So let's take him over to Pilate's house and let him push the button on the chair and execute him. And so they do that. Now, on the way, before that, Peter disowns Jesus. Now, you remember Peter at the Last Supper? Lord, he said, Jesus says, somebody here is going to betray me. And they all said, is it I, Lord? Except for Judas. Judas didn't say, is it I, Lord? He couldn't call him Adonai. He couldn't call him God. He said, "Is it I, Rabbi? You're a wonderful teacher. Just stay in that category. Get out of the God category. And so you're a wonderful teacher." And he said, and Peter stood up and said, "They all may do it, Lord. They may betray you. They may abandon you. They may deny you. But not me, man. I'm going to go right to death with you if I have to. I got you covered. I got your back, Jesus." Jesus said, "No, no, man. Before the rooster crows early morning, you're going to deny me." And so what happens? Peter goes into the charcoal fire in the high priest's courtyard. He's there warming himself, and as we saw, some servant ladies came up and said, "You're one of his followers. You were also there with that Nazarene in the garden." And what did Peter say 3 times? He said, "I don't know or understand what you're talking about. I don't know what you're talking about." Then he says twice, "I don't even know this guy you're talking about. I have no relationship with him." How many times, saints, sinners like me, how many times have we denied Jesus? Have we said we don't know him? We don't know what you're talking about in terms of his death for my sins. I don't know what that's about. Don't bother me with that. I'm saving myself. How about you guys? And so, Peter disowns him 3 times. Can you count in your life? Can I count in my life, fellow sinner that I am, how many times I have denied Jesus? But a word of encouragement here from Luke's gospel, Luke's passion. I love this verse. Because he said after the rooster crowed, Jesus, who was being led through the courtyard, somewhere else to get beaten, spit upon, all the stuff that they did to him because they hated him. They hated him. And their only thing was to get rid of him. And so, Peter looked and he saw Jesus staring at him. Here again, you have to study the Greek in the Bible, the original language. The word that Jesus looked at him is the word that Jesus looked at him, not in condemnation. "You dirt! I told you, Peter. I told you so. You're going to do this." But he looked at him, the Bible says, with love. Now, Peter just denied him. Isn't it amazing? And Jesus sees him in the courtyard being accused of those things and denying all that. And Jesus turns to him and looks at him with love. I would have melted right there. And I know Peter did, because Luke says he wept bitterly. Okay. Well, let's move on here, because I'm running out of time according to Bill back there. All righty. The soldiers mocked Jesus. Now, it's one thing to fall asleep, to be spiritually indifferent to what happens to Jesus. I really don't give a rip. I don't care. But there are people, and it's true in our society. You go on the internet. There are people who hate Christians and hate Christ. And they don't mind saying it. And so they mock him publicly. They spit on him publicly. They beat him and consider him a phony and a hoax. And that's those soldiers who took him and dressed him up like a king in a purple robe, gave him a stick for a crozier for his shepherd's staff, got him all dressed up to spit on him. There's your king.